Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters, as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we cover all the home teams. You know the Saints will be on the agenda, opening up camp. We'll talk a little bit about the Pelicans. Anthony Davis spoke, that's right, talking a little bit about the DeMarcus Cousins departure. We'll get into that. LSU Tulane baseball series, no more. We'll get into that as well. Talk some LSU football. We got a great panel for you tonight. Chris Gordy, my colleague over at Sports 1280, he is my lead-in, and boy, it's a great lead-in, 10 to noon on Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2 and the iHeartRadio app. And Andrew Doak of Channel 4 WLAE-TV are on the panel tonight. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us. We always like to start off letting the folks know a little bit about what you're involved in. Chris, take it away.
Yeah, of course. I host daily on from 10 a.m. to noon on Sports 1280 New Orleans, and just hit our 1 year mark of being local sports talk and continuing to grow. And we got a great lineup. Obviously, once I end things at noon, we hand it off to you. You're on noon to 2, and then David DeCorbier from 2 to 4, and then our man Corey Johnson from 4 to 6. So we got an outstanding local lineup there.
And of course, again, Rummel High School, LSU?
Yes, Rummel guy, LSU guy, born and raised New Orleanian. So yeah, it's fun to talk New Orleans sports every day, and it feels like we're becoming a year-round sports town now with the Pelicans being relevant. Nice to have sports year-round.
Boy, isn't it, huh? Because, again, when you get into the dog days of summer, not having anything to talk about, at least this year, the Pelicans kind of gave us a little something as we led into camp, and that's a good thing. And you have the same situation, right, Andrew? I mean, finding things to be able to report on now, being a year-round sports town?
No doubt about it, and I think, like you mentioned, with the Pelicans being relevant, it gets you excited about NBA free agency over the summer, who are they going to add next. So, yeah, it's total excitement when it comes to year-round sports here in New Orleans. Of course, for me, I've only been here about 10 months now, but feeling like I finally have my sea legs under me. I came from Lubbock, Texas, but you know, this is the best time of year with football season cranking up. Got our 4th Down on 4 show on Sunday nights, and this is my favorite time of year. This is kind of like Christmas for me when Saints training camp starts up.
Yeah, no doubt. Of course, you can catch him anchoring the sports over at the Channel 4, 4th Down on 4. And you guys got an app as well, right?
We do. We do. WWL-TV app and even WWL-TV.com. They're on us about using our cell phones, putting stuff online all the time. So Twitter and Facebook, Andrew Doak, WWL. So we always try to keep it up to date as possible. Well,
welcome to the show. I had him on the radio show last week. Did a fantastic job. He's done a great job on 4th Down 4 as well. Guys, let's get started. Football's here, right? I mean, I tweeted something out. I can't take credit for it. Another journalist put it out there. Last weekend without football until February, and that's a good thing, for especially for us down here in South Louisiana. The Saints, no real drama in the offseason. I mean, that's one of the things I've talked about, the theme this week. You have the Ingram 4-game suspension, but when you look around the league with all the problems they're having with, again, guys that want to renegotiate contracts, guys that are holding out, problems that they've had with injuries, guys coming back from injuries, for the most part, it's been a drama-free offseason for the Saints, and they kicked it off today, and a lot of great expectation for this team.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of that, when I started thinking of when's the last time we were this excited for a Saints season. I go back to 2013, 2014 when they came off, they won the playoff road game against the Eagles and then ended up losing in the second round to the Seahawks over in Seattle. But that offseason, they brought in Brandon Cooks, they drafted in the first round, traded up to get him. There's a lot of excitement about that season, and then it kind of didn't start off so well. They lost the overtime game in Atlanta and then lost the game in week 2 at Cleveland. It kind of went down from there, and they were playing catch up the rest of the year. But that excitement is kind of how it feels now. But the difference is the youth talent that they have on this roster right now. I think I counted 39 guys on this roster right now are age 24 or younger. Wow. And I think 9 of those guys are starters. So that makes you a little bit more excited for carrying the momentum over from last year. Look, the Marcus Williams play, it's going to live on in infamy. Mm-hmm. We're going to see the replays as the season goes along, and when the Saints go to Minnesota on Sunday night, we're going to see all those replays again. But at least you knew you were this close. You knew you're right there. You're at the doorstep. After all those 7 and 9 seasons, the Saints are back. They actually have a defense, and again, the youth movement is what gives you encouragement going into this season.
Yeah, and not up against the cap like you've been in the past because of those young players. That'll come down the line. Your thoughts on the offseason leading into training camp?
I will, to kind of piggyback off of what he was saying, I think from a talent standpoint, I think this might be the most talent that the Saints have had maybe since 2011 or so, when you just had an unbelievable team that ended up losing in San Francisco. But I think this team, there's no doubt the hype is real around the Super Bowl hype, the energy, you can feel it with the fans. And I think it's totally legitimate. I mean, if they don't end up in the Final Four in the NFC, I know the NFC is going to be tough, but if they're not in the Final Four when it's all said and done, I would really be shocked. But at the same time, I mean, you know the NFL, how much parity there is. They had 8 new teams in the playoffs last year, but I think they really have a chance to be able to go to the distance this season. And the 3 seasons before, it was like, when is this rebuild going to be over? And they probably have the best sophomore class in the NFL, coming up this season. That's encouraging.
Well, another thing that's encouraging is today, Okafor, Meredith, Pete, Anzalone, Jordan, all guys with off-season surgery, all on the field today. Now, again, Peyton talked about, some guys are going to be held up. They're going to be limited. They're going to kind of ease them back in. But when you talk about Okafor coming off a ruptured Achilles tendon to be ready to go, Meredith, 2 knee injuries, a broken leg for Pete, Anzalone, again, just that habitual problem with the shoulder. And then, of course, look, when you have back surgery, there's nothing good about back surgery. Jordan coming back from back surgery, it was good to at least have those guys on the field for the first day of training camp.
Yeah, it's definitely a good sign. Alex Okafor is a guy I've had on my show a couple times this offseason, and he talked about it. He said his goal was to be ready for training camp, and here we were day 1, and he was out there. So that's a good sign. All the focus is going to be on Marcus Davenport, and rightfully so. He was a first-round pick. You traded up for him. But I thought Josh Katzenstein, NOLA.com, had a tremendous article a few weeks back talking about the impact of a first-round pass rusher. It takes them at least a year to get going. And so that's why I don't think expectations for Marcus Davenport should be that high this year. I think Alex Okafor is the guy to really focus on, who was off to an outstanding season last year. He could be a difference maker for you this year. And then you talk about Cameron Meredith. He's another guy who's my other X factor, at least on offense. You look at the Saints last year, how many times drive stalled on 3rd and short.
Yes.
They couldn't convert, couldn't move the chains. I think Cameron Meredith is a guy who can help in the passing game and move those chains.
Your thoughts on these guys coming back from injury and the impact they can have this season?
I think Alex Okafor, no doubt, was having the best season of his career. I think he had kind of found a role finally with the Saints after some years with the Cardinals, where it just didn't seem like he was able to stay on the field as much as he wanted to, and didn't have necessarily the role that I think he did within Dennis Allen's defense. So if he comes back healthy this year, obviously Achilles injuries are tough, but if he comes back healthy this year and plays like he did last year, it was really a shame that his season got cut short. And then some of the other guys that were coming back from injury. Who else did we mention?
Pete with a broken leg. Meredith with the 2 knee surgeries.
And Pete will be big along that offensive line. I mean, to be able to have all 5 of your starters come back is huge. The only question mark that I have is, who's that 6th guy who really steps up in the rotation? And when it comes to Cameron Meredith, like you had mentioned, 3rd down was a killer for you last year. They were 22nd in 3rd down conversion percentage. In the Sean Payton era, they hadn't been worse than 6th. Previous to that, in many seasons, when you look back, they were 1st, 2nd, or at least right in that range. Last year was a total anomaly, and I think they needed somebody, whether it was a tight end or a slot guy, who was going to be able to give you production on 3rd downs. And look to last year, it was a 3rd down that could have won you that football game in Minnesota, where if Alvin Kamara doesn't get stuffed on 3rd and 1, you likely get a 1st down, march it down the field a little bit longer, run it to 3 seconds, let Lutz kick a field goal, and you're walking out of there.
Yes.
So third down will be huge for the Saints this season.
I think on both sides of the ball, guys. I mean, again, the inability to really stop the run, that's got to be addressed. They did it with DeMario Davis. I still think they have to find an interior defensive tackle that is going to be physical, that is going to be a run stuffer for them. I don't know if that guy's on the roster right now. You mentioned the offensive line, and I think losing Clemente, you can't downplay that. Again, a guy that can play every single position on that line. I think it's going to be shared by a couple of guys, and maybe the guys, Bushrod and Luribius, maybe those two guys. Andrew, your thoughts? Will it be one guy? Will it be multiple guys that are going to now back up the 5 starters on the offensive line?
That's a really good question, because I think, if it comes down to Luribius or Jermon Bushrod, or even someone like Cameron Tom at center, because you have to make the decision, who do we have behind Max Unger?
Right.
And I think he's like a guy that almost you can't replace.
I agree with that.
And so, and he probably doesn't get talked about enough. So, and look, you look to the left side of that line with Teron Armstead. He's someone who hasn't played a full 16 games in his whole NFL career. Now, he feels like this offseason that he's done everything that he can to be able to put himself in position to be able to finish a full season. But if you lost someone like him, you could slide a couple of guys over that, they're very versatile along that offensive line. I think Jermon Bushrod has a little bit more, he's a little bit less green than some of the other guys. Cameron Tom, I don't even believe has had a snap in the NFL.
They love him
at
though.
Center, and they do love him, and I know he was getting some reps today. So if I had to put my money on it right now, I'd say Jermon Bushrod is kind of the 6th guy within that offensive line. But look, I think even as we saw at linebacker today, I mean, there was Manti Te'o was rolled out in the first 3. I didn't expect that. So I think we could see anybody by the end of training camp in week 1 that could be that 6th man.
Your thoughts on the depth along the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that starting 5 is as good as any in all the NFL. If they can stay healthy, my goodness, I mean, that offensive line is one of the best. But that's the problem, is they can't stay healthy. I mean, they lucked out last year. Ryan Ramczyk played in every game, but we talked about it. Teron Armstead with the injury concerns, Andrus Peat with injury concerns. So, again, they've got to find that guy, and they've got to find him quick. I don't know if Bushrod is the answer. Yeah. Maybe it's one of these young guys that they brought in, some of the undrafted guys, but they got to find out who that guy is pretty quickly, because we saw how important Clemente was last year and how much of you didn't even think about him by the end of the season. When he was in there, you felt good about it. And so they got to find that guy really quick in these next couple weeks, because the injuries are going to happen. Somebody's going to go down at some point, and you got to fill that hole.
Right, and I think it's going to be multiple guys, and I think it's going to be difficult because the kickoff rules, the way they've changed. In the past, you've had bigger guys you could put out there, offensive linemen up front to be able to block. Now, things have changed. So, when you're looking at that roster, you're trying to get down to that final 53, and you're thinking, gosh, I got to keep I'm keeping 8 offensive linemen, 9 offensive linemen, and you're not in a situation now where you got one guy that can play multiple positions, meaning everyone on the line. Now you're in a situation where, Tom might be your backup center. Bushrod might be a guy that's going to play your tackle. And, again, you talk about Luribius, he can play inside guard and center. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. The running back position is also, again, intriguing. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Mark Ingram was going to be out the first 4 games. They brought in Shane Vereen. They brought in West. They've got Edmonds on the roster also. Lasco goes on PUP. You look at Williams from Arkansas, some of these guys that have been on this roster. What do you think happens there? Are they going to stay with the guys they have? You think they'll be looking elsewhere? And then how much do they use Kamara, especially in those first 4 games?
Yeah, I thought it was real interesting when the news of the suspension of Ingram first came out. Sean Payton said, "No, we like what we have in house. We're not going to go to the veteran market." And here we are, a couple months later. Shane Vereen signed, Terrence West signed. So I think it's going to be real interesting. Larry Holder put out his predictions for his 53 man. He thinks Terrence West is the guy because he reminds you most of Mark Ingram. His style of running, he's a between the tackles guy, whereas Vereen is more that pass catcher out of the backfield, almost an insurance policy for Kamara in case something happens to him, God forbid, during training camp. But Vereen, a lot of people think is old and maybe washed up and all this, but he was still very productive as a back in New York last year. Still caught 44 balls, and that's pretty good considering majority of the starters in the NFL didn't catch that many balls. Guys like Leonard Fournette didn't catch that many passes. So I think Shane Vereen still has something there. again, I go back to Trey Edmonds. I didn't see it in last training camp and preseason. He ends up making the roster last year and ends up playing a good bit in that Buffalo game and looked pretty good in that game.
Special teams for him was the reason why.
Special teams was the reason he made the roster. But yeah, they got to figure it out and figure it out quick. And I think Terrence West could be that guy. But what you don't want to happen is lean on Kamara too much those first 4 weeks, because God forbid something happens to him and you're really behind the 8 ball.
Thoughts on the running backs?
I think when just to piggyback off of what he said, you don't want to lean on Kamara too much. And I think Sean was pretty quick to say, look, the incorrect thought would be that we would start giving him more carries or more touches. I think they found a number with him, which I think was about 17 a game last year. And I think even that number was a little bit misleading, because as he became a cog in that offense, he got even more touches. I think the more touches that he could have would be split out wide as a wide receiver. I don't think you're going to see him have more runs in between the tackles. But when it comes to, behind him, I think Jonathan Williams and Trey Edmonds, I think you know what you have in those players. And so that's why I think Sean obviously elected to bring in veteran running backs, because we've seen these guys for, a year or so. Let's go and give someone who can bang between the tackles like a Terrence West, who can take carries off of Alvin Kamara. And then I think Shane Vereen, like he had said, is really going to help you in the screen game, because the last thing that you want to see is Kamara get squared up like he did by Deion Jones in that Atlanta Falcons game. That just kind of shows you, and I'm not sure why that is. Deion, I guess, is just one of the more athletic players in the NFL. But, I mean, you never saw anybody square up Kamara all last season. But if he's able to stay on the field and get through those first 4 weeks, maybe it could end up being a benefit that Mark Ingram, at the age that he is, only has 12 weeks ahead of him to be able to finish out a season, and then the postseason after that with a little bit fresher legs.
Talk about the wide receivers.
I think Michael Thomas is going to have a breakout year. I think some people, depending on who you talk to, will say that they believe Michael Thomas is already a top 5 receiver in the NFL. Either way, I believe he's a top 10. He's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. But I thought the game that stood out to me more than any was their divisional round matchup against Minnesota. And Minnesota fans might tell you, oh, Xavier Rhodes was a little banged up. All I know is I saw Michael Thomas completely dominate Xavier Rhodes up and down the field. And when they needed him most, he was able to score for them. He had 2 great touchdowns that helped keep the Saints in the game and really ended up setting them up to be in position to win that game. And so I think he's going to have a breakout year. I think Cameron Meredith, again, is going to be someone who's a big option on this team. And I still think Ted Ginn has some left in the tank. I think he's a guy who probably doesn't get talked about enough, but I feel like he's safely on this roster because he's probably the only guy that can really take the top off of the defense. And we saw him do that in multiple situations last season. So Traquan Smith is another guy that I'm interested to really see this season, the rookie out of Central Florida. I think he could have some upside as well. So, and then Ben Watson at tight end. You wonder, he had his most productive season with the Saints while he was here. At 37 years old, though, how much does he have left in the tank, and coming off an Achilles injury a couple years ago? All I know is I saw him the other day, and at 37 years old, I wish I looked like him because that guy's still built.
Yeah. What I'm interested in is Austin Carr, Trayvon Durrell. Okay, Durrell is a guy that could take the top off the defense if he get on the field from the practice squad. And there's a reason why they kept Carr on this roster last year. Okay, they were hiding him. They stashed him. They didn't put him on the practice squad. They didn't expose him. He was available, I think, for a couple games on game day. Other than that, he was inactive. I think it's an interesting cut there.
Yeah, and really those are all the guys to watch throughout training camp and the preseason. I think it's almost like you don't need to play Michael Thomas, you don't need to play Ted Ginn. You know exactly what you have in those 2 guys. I think it's curious, Brandon Coleman starting the year on the PUP list. He's kind of behind the 8 ball. We talked about it a few weeks ago.
You had him on the show, right?
Yeah, we had him on a couple weeks ago, and he didn't really allude to not being healthy, but we saw it throughout minicamp. He wasn't out there. So he's a guy that I've said the past couple weeks I thought was maybe on the bubble. And so starting off unhealthy for training camp, I think it puts him a little bit behind the other guys. But this is an interesting time to see what you said, like Trayvon Durrell, Austin Carr, see what you have in those guys. Traquan Smith, I'm real interested to see a little bit more of him. It was weird. I went back and looked at the numbers last year. I didn't realize Brandon Coleman was the 3rd leading receiver, at least among receivers last year, caught 20-something passes. but how much they threw the ball to Kamara and Ingram out of the backfield.
Yes.
I mean, they were among your top 4 pass catchers last year. So obviously the Ben Watson factor helps them now because Kobe Fleener was just a disaster, let's face it. But Drew really missed that safety blanket, that tight end. So I could easily see Ben Watson, if he could stay healthy, he'll be in that top 4 target range. And the question is, who's at number 4, who's at number 5? And Tommy Lee Lewis is a guy, every time you want to count him
I'll
out,
tell you what.
he comes back up. And we saw today at practice, he was the dominant guy on special teams, and that's where I think they're thinking, okay, he's our return man this year.
Actually, Peyton said it yesterday. Again, guys can make this team, especially young guys on the special teams. That's a niche for them, and we've seen it over and over again. Chris, watching a lot of Saints football over the years, this might be the most depth I've seen on the defensive side of the ball.
Absolutely. I mean, especially linebacking core. I mean, think about how many linebackers have come and gone through here. I mean, you've had the studs like Jonathan Vilma who've come and gone, but I mean, you talk about depth, and last year was a really surprise what you had in Manti Te'o and Craig Robertson, who's been Mr. Reliable. Every time you call on him, he answers the call. Anzalone, you like what you saw out of him. But like you mentioned, you had Demario Davis. Real interested to see him out there. He's a tackling machine. A.J. Klein looked really good for most of last year. So I like the linebacking core, and then the secondary, the depth that they have there. My goodness. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore, having a number 1 cornerback that you just don't even have to worry about out there is something you have not seen in a long time as a Saints fan. So for me, going through the years of Fred Toast Thomas and all these different guys who have been bust, and
bringing back bad memories.
I mean, my goodness, it's been bad. It's just so nice to have a secondary that can actually compete out there.
Yeah, no doubt. Your thoughts on the defense, Andrew?
I think with the safety group, that was something that stood out to me, being able to bolster that as well. I think Kurt Coleman is someone who just brings a real veteran leadership to this squad. And look, you look back to last season, no matter who makes that rotation as one of those 3 safeties, they were playing a nickel package almost 70% of the time last season. So whoever is the third man is basically a starter. I mean, so no matter if it's Coleman or Von Bell alongside Marcus Williams, they're going to see plenty of playing time. I think you saw last year Von Bell, he was a great tackler and he was a great blitzer. I thought sometimes he got lost a little bit in pass coverage, but I think Kurt Coleman is someone who's really going to be able to help solidify that group. And I don't know if he's going to be the same level of the 2015 season when he was with the Panthers and they went to the Super Bowl against the Broncos. But I think as long as he's healthy, he's going to be a big presence back there. And then I think just from the linebacker standpoint, versatility stands out to me. I mean, we keep debating, well, who's going to be the Mike? Who's going to be the Will? Who's going to be the Sam? I think the good thing is when you look at almost all these guys, I think you can put them almost anywhere. And I think Demario Davis, the key with him was not only just being able to bolster your run defense. Last season, I was looking at it. Pro Football Focus at inside linebacker had him the 3rd best coverage linebacker. I mean, guys were only catching less than a yard per play. It was 3rd best in the NFL at his position. So I think he's going to be somebody, whether he's at the Mike or the Will, whether you have Klein at the Mike or the Strong or Anzalone at the weak or whatever works out. I think versatility is going to be a key for them. And with Dennis Allen, we've seen that's something he loves to have, is he can just put guys out there. And if you do have versatility at linebacker, the good thing is when you run those nickel packages, you don't have to take one of those linebackers off the field. You can trust them in certain situations to guard someone like a Gronkowski, or if you face a Jarvis Landry in the slot, you could take him off. I think versatility is just a big thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And talking about Coleman, they brought Roman Harper in last year. Again, a guy that could be a mentor, a guy that could be a leader back there. And they were hoping they had something left in the tank. He didn't, okay? But you bring in a guy like Coleman. Harper actually went out and recruited him for the Saints. And now I think you have the best of both worlds. You got a guy who has been in the NFL, who's a leader. He's going to show a lot of leadership, and especially with that young group back there. And he's a guy that can still play.
Yeah, I had him on my show a few weeks ago, and he even said that he knows his role coming in here. Yeah, he's coming in hoping to be a playmaker and hoping to make some plays out there, but he said he knows he's coming in to be that veteran leader. And really, you do lose something in Kenny Vaccaro going by the wayside. We know he would get beat over the top, but he was a tackling machine out there. With him gone, I think now you lean on Kurt Coleman to be that leader back there, the veteran of the secondary. When you talk about the young guys like Marcus Williams, Lattimore, it's a lot of young guys out there, Crawley. So it's good to have that vocal leader, but to me, the X factor that could really be the difference maker this year is what do you have in Patrick Robinson?
Yes.
Bringing him back seems to be a different guy from what we remember in a Saints uniform a couple years ago. Worked out very well for the Eagles last year. I'm interested to see what kind of playmaker he is in the secondary.
I agree with you because, again, you can think back, Philly, great defense, great defensive line, makes, again, defensive backs look really good. He had a tough time here in New Orleans his first time around. You watch what he did at Philly last year, and you're saying, man, that's a different player. Can that translate here in New Orleans where, let's face it, Saints have a nice defensive line, but I don't think it's Philly's defensive line.
Sure. I think similar to someone like Marcus Williams, who has to get that bad taste out of his mouth of last season, he had to do that. Patrick Robinson had to do that somewhere else. And, he went to Philly. I talked to plenty of people when he was still here in New Orleans, and they remember when he was here, he got more butt chewings than a lot of people. And it almost kind of broke him as a player. And so I think when you saw him in Philadelphia, he was a big part of that secondary. I remember a big pick six that he had against Minnesota to be able to go to the Super Bowl. So I think he's a different player with a newfound confidence coming back to New Orleans. And, I hope the fans receive him well because I really think he is a different player all around.
Yeah, I think the fans will. Again, always forgiven. He's back. He's a Saint. I think that it'll be fine. Unless he gets burned, then, of course, we know what happens then. Guys, you almost don't want to talk about the backup quarterback situation because, God forbid, anything would happen with Drew Brees. But when you look at the backup quarterback position, I'll take you first, Andrew. What do you think happens there? Again, we hear Taysom Hill is going to be a guy that's going to be on special teams. Can you really have your backup quarterback being on special teams? I mean, this is not Joe Theismann back with the Washington Redskins. Your thoughts, what happens there? Is it Savage? Is it Hill? Is it going to be both of those guys that are going to be on the roster? And yet you can keep a guy like Taysom Hill active on game day because of his ability to play special teams.
I think Tom Savage ends up being your backup quarterback, at least for right now, to start the season. I think he's just a guy who has a lot more experience than Taysom Hill. I think we got to remember, too, the hype that started around Taysom Hill was because Sean Payton started it.
Yes.
So, and I think he likes that fact. It's a legitimate question, though, about Drew Brees because at 39 years old, you just wonder, quarterbacks his age seem to kind of fall off a table, and hopefully we're not, sitting here at the end of next year at this same position, at least, debating whether or not he still has any left in the tank. But I think I've posed this question to someone. If I were to give you a first-round pick next year, which obviously the Saints don't have, and either you take Taysom Hill as your quarterback of the future or you take that first-round pick, I think 90% of people out there, maybe higher, would take that first-round pick. At BYU, he was much more of a runner than he was a thrower.
And often injured.
And look, if we know anything about the NFL, you can't run too much or you're going to be out of the league quickly as a quarterback. So I think Tom Savage, just given so many reps that he has in Houston, even as the starter, I think that gives him a big thumbs up going into the season as the backup.
You can give us real insight into Tom Savage.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I mean, God bless him. He's a tremendous guy and person. But look, we know it. Like you said, if a starting quarterback goes down, Drew Brees goes down, the Saints are in trouble. We don't all have the luxury like the Eagles did to lose Carson Wentz.
Right.
Oh, there's a Nick Foles who could step up and be Super Bowl MVP for you. But the reality is, I really like J.T. Barrett. I hope they have something in him. He's a guy who broke some of Drew Brees' records in the Big Ten. I'm real interested to see how he does throughout training camp and into the preseason. And hopefully have some kind of project there. But I think people focus too much on this quarterback of the future. And we know the talk of Patrick Mahomes a year ago, and Drew Brees or Sean Payton likes all these different guys. Worry about that when it gets here. When Drew Brees says, hey, I'm done, then you worry about where you go from there. But this whole thing about you need to bring in a guy and groom him and all this, Drew Brees is not showing any signs of slowing down. So I'm not worried about that right now. But like you said, I mean, Sean Payton seems to love Taysom Hill. He loves the versatility. We'll see if he can jump Tom Savage here in the preseason and as the backup. But again, to me, when the conversation is Brees is out, who's up, I think the Saints are in trouble no matter who it is.
I definitely agree with that, no doubt about it. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest tonight, Andrew Doak of WLAE-TV here in New Orleans, Chris Gordy of Sports 1280. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Quick break from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest tonight, Chris Gordy of Sports 1280, Andrew Doak of Channel 4 Television. Guys, it was announced yesterday Zach Strief is going to be the new play-by-play voice of the New Orleans Saints. He goes from the right tackle position with the New Orleans Saints into the broadcast booth. I've been pretty clear on where I stand on this. I don't think it's possible. He may be a prodigy. From basically what we heard on little cuts that we heard on my show, on Chris's show, and what WWL Radio put out yesterday, it's going to be a huge work in progress. And it's just not something, in my opinion, that you can do. I don't think that any of the candidates that were mentioned for this job could go from the booth and be a right tackle in the NFL. And I don't think it's possible for a right tackle in the NFL to go from the field and go be a play-by-play voice. You could do color. I think Zach Strief could do great as a color analyst. I just don't think that, again, with the type of job that is, and the practice and honing your skills, that it is something that can be done. We wish him the best. We love Zach Strief. He's been very, very media friendly during his time here in New Orleans. A guy that's always been a stand-up guy, but this is a difficult job, and it's one of 32, and it's a prize position. I'm not getting it. We'll see what happens. I just wonder how patient New Orleans is going to be with Zach Strief as he tries to grow into this job. Chris, your thoughts?
I mean, I tend to agree with you. As a guy who has a degree in broadcast journalism, who did several years of high school football play-by-play, worked the sidelines, it's tough, man. It's an art form. It's not just jumping in the booth and, oh, okay, let's put on a headset and let's go. When you look around the league at some of the guys who hold these jobs, majority of them have broadcast journalism degrees. Dave Pash in Arizona, Wes Durham in Atlanta, Mick Mixon in Carolina. All these guys are lifelong broadcasters. There's a reason those guys are in those positions, because they've worked hard at it. They developed the craft over years.
Yes.
Nobody just goes from the playing field into the booth as far as play-by-play. Now, color commentator, I thought Zach would be tremendous. Unfortunately, that job's already filled by Deuce McAllister. I even thought maybe a three-man booth. Maybe put the three, to those two guys with an actual play-by-play guy in there. And I understand budgets are limited and you can't pay them, but man, there are going to be some growing pains with Zach. Again, now that it's official that he has a job, I wish him the best of luck. Yes. I hope for New Orleans' sake he does well.
Absolutely.
But the reality is it's going to take time, and we have to have patience. And this whole attitude about, oh, it doesn't matter who you put in there, it's going to be tough because you're replacing a legend in Jim Henderson. I go back to CBS this year. They replaced Vern Lundquist with Brad Nessler. How many people complained? How many people said, oh, he can't replace Vern? It's because you replaced a professional with a professional. If they had brought in a pro to replace Jim Henderson, I think we would have seamless transition. We would have said, okay, great. But we're going to see all of Zach's warts are going to stand out this year. And 2 weeks from tonight, they're in action, and we'll see if Zach has the chops.
No doubt. Andrew?
Why did you mention Brent Musburger as well?
Him too,
I think he just became the voice
of
the Raiders.
Right? The Raiders.
So I mean, he's a guy who's done this for a really long time. Look, I think like you had mentioned, you have to be able to describe the game for people that can't see it, and that's different than being the color analyst.
Absolutely.
When it comes to the list that they had, Mike Haas, who works at Channel 4, obviously full disclosure, then Joel Myers, Sean Kelly, those are all guys that would have been very deserving of it. And as well. It would have been very deserving of it, have done it for a long time. Look, I think when it comes to Zach, I think if he does well, he should be commended for it. And I think if he struggles, then I think that fans should be able to let him know, because you're a part of the media now. It comes with the territory. If I do a bad job, which is a lot of the time, I should hear from people. So
my hands up.
There's no doubt about it that it was a big risk to go with Zach Strief. My biggest hope with him, and he's been nothing but fantastic every time that I've talked to him. More than willing to give you some time, which is awesome in this industry. But what I would hope with him is that he tells it how it is. And the last thing that you want is to be a mouthpiece for the team that you used to play for. You want to be able to give perspective and tell it how you really believe it. And so that's that would be my advice to him if he even cared, would just be, look, just shoot people straight, because I think when you're honest with people, I think they respect that more than anything.
Yeah, look, I think he will be honest, and I think he's going to be straightforward. I think the problem is, again, the craft of being a play-by-play voice.
Yes.
That's going to be the difficult part of it.
And remember, just the mechanics. We need to know down and distance.
Yes.
We need to know where the ball is. We need to know how much time is left.
Right.
Those are all, and the score. I mean, those are all the things you need to keep doing. And then who has the ball?
Right.
So all this other stuff about Zach's going to be this and Zach's going to. I heard him say, "I'm going to give you a perspective that other people couldn't give you from being inside that huddle and all that." Well, again, that's the job for Deuce to do.
Right.
You just need to give us the basics. Tell us what's happening. And again, WWL had every right to make this hire, but just as they had the right to make the hire, we have the right to be critical if it doesn't work.
Absolutely. And look, we do radio, and you do TV full time. There's something in your ear all the time. It's called a producer, okay, or a director, and you got to be able to do that at the same time. They're handing you sponsorships that you have to be able to acknowledge. I mean, it is a tough job. Not just that. I mean, again, things are a mile a minute, and by the way, sometimes things go wrong.
Yeah,
okay,
no doubt.
and you got to deal with that when it goes wrong. You cannot hesitate. It's like, again, can't miss a block. You've got to be able to handle it when things go wrong. We wish Zach Street the best. We'll see how it works out. This is an interesting subject here. LSU Tulane have been playing baseball since 1893. They have played every year since 1936. And this week it was announced that they will no longer play on a home-and-home basis. They will not play this season, upcoming season. They will play, at least right now, in the WLAE-TV Classic in 2020. I am older than you guys, and I come from a time when LSU and Tulane played football on a yearly basis, when they played basketball multiple times, when they played baseball home and home as well, where again there was a true rivalry. People cared about what went on with LSU and Tulane. Even though Tulane might have got their brains beat out, people cared about that LSU-Tulane game, and when Tulane would rise up and beat LSU, it was a huge thing for that university. You're talking about a national university, a private university, but you're talking about a university that, again, when you look at these two teams, they really started at college athletics here in this state. There's a tradition there, and I think it's bigger than Pulmonary, and I think it's bigger than the athletic directors and the coaches that are involved in this now. And I am sad to see this series go, like I'm sad to see them not playing in football or playing in basketball anymore. Chris, you're a graduate of LSU. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, when I was at LSU in the mid-2000s, when we played Tulane in football, some of the older folks are like, "This is a great rivalry," and we're going, "Really? With who?
Right.
Tulane?"
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We didn't know anything about it.
Sure.
So, but no, I mean, at least on the baseball diamond, it's been fun to play those guys home and home year by year. And again, I'm an LSU guy, so I'm a little partial, but I can see where both sides are coming from on this. I mean, there was a big hubbub last year when LSU was playing at Tulane, and you had to go to Tulane's website and subscribe to the stream in order to watch the game.
That was wrong.
It was, but again, this is Tulane's revenue opportunity. They hike up the prices for the LSU game because they know they're going to have butts in the seats. And so Tulane doesn't have the athletic budget that LSU does. They need to make money any way they can. And so I see that angle. But on the other angle, LSU is at the pinnacle of attendance in college baseball. They've led the nation in attendance year after year. Their fans follow them wherever they go. They come to Tulane, the fans are coming. The fans are also watching at home. I talked with a buddy of mine who works for ESPN. He said in February and March, they set records on the Watch ESPN app watching LSU baseball games because it was the only team that people were tuning in to watch on a religious basis to watch college baseball on the ESPN app. So obviously Pulmonary has a luxury. He knows his fan base is going to follow him, and so he's choosing for this series to go by the wayside this year. I like at least that they're going to play each other in the PONF Classic every year, so at least keeps them playing each other. But now the revenues go to a charitable cause as opposed to each school being able to take the revenue.
Andrew, you just got here, but what are your thoughts on this? Because again, look, on my show, you're getting different opinions. And I think it also is a generational thing, you know.
Sure.
I saw
agree.
this rivalry, and I saw it go away. I mean, you've seen it in other conferences as well, where teams played each other each and every year. They switch out of a conference, and all of a sudden, that rivalry's gone.
Sure. Texas and Texas A&M
There you go.
was the first one that comes to mind. In my case, just being from Austin, Texas. Look, I wrote a story earlier this week and got a lot of blowback from Tulane fans because I was a little partial to LSU. I think that it is sad that this rivalry is taking at least a one-year hiatus after 81 straight years of playing each other annually. But I thought Troy Danon had joined the Fear the Wave podcast, and I listened to his interview. The first thing that he mentioned as far as the disconnect between LSU and Tulane is he said us as an athletic program, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, we're not giving LSU enough of a reason to come and play us. That's an issue for all sports. You have to be able to give them an incentive where it's not a lose-lose situation for someone like LSU. When it comes to the online stream, I'll play devil's advocate here. In my opinion, there are so many LSU fans that are in New Orleans that don't want to have to drive all the way to Baton Rouge. You still would have put butts in seats that night, and you still would have filled that whole place up, because when I saw that crowd that night, it was 3/4 LSU, and all the way down the right and left field line, it was LSU fans.
Yes.
Look, they price gouged a little bit. That's not anything that LSU doesn't do for football,
right.
so that's fair. But I think when it comes down to it, it didn't make sense to me from the Tulane standpoint. Yes, you don't want to give your broadcasting rights away to someone like LSU, but you can't convince me that you made more money off of the online stream than you would have partnering on a deal with Cox. You played on Cox all season, whether it was against UL Lafayette or UNO. And when it comes to Tulane as well, you need help as much as anyone when it comes to recruiting. True. If you think beating LSU 5 out of the last 6 means so much, why wouldn't you want it broadcast on a regional level so that you can go out there and recruit and say, hey, we've beat the flagship program in this state 5 out of the last 6 times. LSU has bigger potatoes that they're going after. To them, I think this series, the way it's fallen apart, it's small potatoes to them. They have a bigger goal in mind. And at the end of the day, in Tulane's case, baseball-wise, over the last 6 years, we broke this down. Over the last 6 years, they've averaged 82 in RPI. LSU's been 10th. They're always in the mix. So you don't really hold the cards. I'm not saying that the older generation doesn't want to see this rivalry. Of course they do. But at the end of the day, you can't try to push around the bear who has all the cards and all the berries gathered up. Like they're the better program right now, and that's just how it is. Tulane has a historic program, and they have an opportunity to be able to get back. But right now they have so many problems that are fighting against them, as well as how they're going to be able to recruit players that can afford to pay what they charge at their school right now. Because look, more than half the team is only going to be on partial scholarship when it comes to baseball, and it's almost put them out of the running on some of these recruits.
Yeah, it's really tough, and that's honestly that is the ridiculous thing about the partial scholarships in college baseball. By now, they should be on the same footing with every other sport.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
No, but you mentioned, I mean, if Tulane was where they once were, I mean, and obviously Coach Pierce did a tremendous job. He's now at the University of Texas. Coach Jewett has a little work to do here. If Tulane is a national seed just about every year, then this series has ramifications. And LSU and Tulane, that series means something. But for now, it doesn't.
One other point, if I could bring it up.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I would mention to a team like Tulane as well, as much as you dislike going on the road, with the RPI, what we've seen is you gain points by going and playing on the road and playing a good team. You could get housed in Baton Rouge. That would help your RPI probably by the end of the night. I know it's a weird way in how it works out, but traveling down the road, I know you wouldn't have as many fans. I know you're not getting as much revenue. I get all of that. But from an RPI standpoint, which you need help with, that would help you.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Guys, let's talk some LSU football. Urban Meyer this week literally gushed about Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, again, everybody thinking he's the savior. Look, the defense is going to be one of the top defenses in college football. There's no doubt about that. The questions are all on the offensive side, Chris. You got a lot of talent at wide receiver, but who's going to ultimately emerge that? You don't know what you have in running back at the running back position. You would think the offensive line, after last year playing so many young players, they're going to be pretty good on the offensive line. The biggest question, obviously, as it's always been, at least in recent times, is the quarterback position. Going by what Urban Meyer said, again, that it was razor thin in terms of who was going to be the starter, and he seemed to say all the right things about Joe Burrow. Talk about Burrow, talk about this LSU football team, and what do you think is going to happen this season?
Well, it's all going to be on his shoulders. I mean, it really is. It's amazing when you think back to LSU the past 5-6 years. You didn't have to worry about who was in the backfield. You knew with Fournette and Geis, you were solid. The receiving core, you always had either a junior or a senior leader to lean on. And this year, it's a bunch of unknowns. You really don't know what you have. But when it comes to Burrow, I mean, look, it's right out of the gates. It's a tough test. Neutral field game against Miami. Week 3, you're at Auburn. I mean, LSU could find themselves at 1-2 very quickly. Now, the good news is it doesn't mean the season's going to go downhill from there. It doesn't mean, oh my God, let's blow up the program, they're going to lose 6 games. Burrow could start to learn the offense a little bit more, gel with his teammates as the season goes along. Suddenly, maybe you upset a Georgia in Tiger Stadium. Maybe you're beating Alabama in Tiger Stadium. So just because they start off rough doesn't mean that the season can't end well on the back end. But I'm with you. I mean, it's so funny when a guy transfers from a school, typically the opposing team's fan base, you hear, oh, he stunk. Right. Oh, good riddance. We don't want to see anymore. Everybody from Ohio State was like, hey, best of luck to Joe Burrow. We loved him. We think he's great. It just didn't work out here. We have a guy who's a little bit better than him. But for Urban Meyer to come out and speak so highly of Joe Burrow tells you something about the kid.
Absolutely. Andrew, your thoughts on Joe Burrow, your thoughts on the LSU football team this season?
Well, I think it was kind of funny that I think everybody assumes that Joe Burrow is going to be the starter. And we know that Ed Orgeron has been so quiet about, like, no, look, it's an open competition. And I believe that it sort of is to a certain standpoint. But we saw it was BetDSI put out odds the other day on who's going to be LSU's starting quarterback. And so many people started betting on Joe Burrow that they ended up taking down the money line. And they said something along the lines of usually when they see sharp bets like that, they feel like somebody's got some inside info. So I think LSU, it's fair for them to be picked 5th in the SEC West. That's based on what happened last season. But I think moving forward with Ed Orgeron, his success at LSU, whether he remains the coach, is tied to the hip of his quarterback and whether or not he's going to be able to figure out the offense. And I think if he hits on Joe Burrow, we could be talking about a totally different narrative at the end of the season.
Yes.
If he's able to really be able to spread it out and start throwing the football like him and Steve Ensminger have been talking about this offseason, because I know everybody is a little bit skeptical when they hear, hey, we're going to be 4, maybe 5 wide, throwing the football, pushing it downfield. But I think Burrow has a lot of talent, and I think if he comes in, it's his job. When he comes in, it's his job to lose. I just think when training camp starts, and I think what you've seen is nobody at LSU would bring in another quarterback if they felt like they had something in-house that was going to be able to give them the best chance to be able to win. Brennan, maybe next year, who knows? I mean, but you're going to have 2 years with Burrow. I think if you're able to hit on him, everything could flip on its head for LSU, and your offense could be totally different. And with that defense, who knows where you could end up in the SEC West.
And look, for Miles Brennan, I would say be patient, okay? I mean, you've got to add some weight. And that's been the hardest thing for him, to be able to add weight. And, look, go in the competition. You never know what happens. You're only, again, 1 snap away from being the starter once again. So, or for the first time in his case. It'll be interesting to see ultimately how this kind of pans out. But there's a lot on the line for this program right now, especially when you look at this 2019 class. You covered a lot on your show, Chris. You guys do a great job talking about recruiting. You got one of the top classes in the country in Louisiana coming in 2019. The verbal commitments they've received have been incredible thus far. But we know if ultimately you're not winning, there's going to be negative recruiting, and you may not be able to hold on to those guys. So a lot is on the line with Ed Orgeron in terms of his future here in Louisiana, in terms of him at LSU, and of course these Louisiana recruits staying home.
It's all about expectations, right? When we come into the season, we know it's a tough schedule. We know the schedule doesn't set up for them this year. Maybe what this is a year to get Burrow his feet wet, get the young guys experience. It's set up for the 2019 season. But again, fans don't want to hear that. Fans can say that all they want now, and then when they have their 3rd or 4th loss, everybody's going, fire the bum. All we want to see is promise. We don't want to see a butt whooping at Mississippi State like we had last year. We don't want to see lost to a team in Troy that had no business of being on the football field with you that night. We just want to see a little bit of promise. If you lose the games, okay, we can stomach it as long as we see some promise. Hey, the running back happened to fumble and they took it to the house. Okay, little things like that you could clean up. We just want to see some promise. And if you're losing games 33-13, that's not going to sit well with the fan base.
How big is this recruiting class in Ed Orgeron keeping his job?
I think it adds some more time for him. I think even if you won 6 or 7 games, I think it kind of cools that seat down a little bit that you say, hey, we got the #1 overall recruit according to Rivals that's in Baton Rouge, Stingley coming in. I mean, when you look at that 2019 class, it is very impressive, and it's honestly, it shows how great of a recruiter Orgeron is when they haven't had the success, over his first season that LSU fans would have liked to see. But Look, I think if they win 6 or 7 games, I think that's right about where the expectation level is, and it would kind of lead him to still be on the hot seat going into next year, but it would buy him some time where they would at least say, hey, let's see what the product is on the field.
It's so ironic, getting to Tulane for a moment, they have a quarterback in Jonathan Banks, and they have a guy that, again, if he plays well, they're going to be in a bowl game this year. And the unknown at LSU, because even with the changeover you've seen with guys that moved on with Tulane, everything's going to go as Jonathan Banks takes them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Tulane arguably should have been in a bowl game last year. They were that close.
They got robbed.
Tulane head coach Willie Fritz, we were talking to him this offseason, and he legitimately thinks that Jonathan Banks has an NFL arm and could potentially play in the NFL. I mean, he told us that off camera. He was like, this guy really has some talent. And I think what you're going to see a little bit more of, too, is that he's going to evolve his offense a little bit. I don't think it's going to be as much heavy triple option. You saw him move a lot more into pistol formations in a triple option form, but out of the shotgun. I think he's really going to be closer to 50-50 in the passing game, when last year he was closer to, I think it was about 60-40s, and maybe even leaning a little bit more in the running direction. But obviously that had to do with who you had back there as your running back. I think Jonathan Banks could have a really good season, and I think they could make a bowl game.
He's got to stay healthy, because I had Ty Graffinini, voice of the Green Wave, on this week. Not much behind him right now. So he's got to stay healthy. Let's grab a quick call before we move to Pelicans. Jeffrey is on the West Bank. Jeffrey, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Jeffrey.
Thank you for taking my call. It's amazing the things that I'm hearing about LSU, and the expectation is 6 to 7 games. That's not going to fly. That's not going to fly. That's unacceptable. In 2018, that is totally unacceptable. We can't accept that. You cannot have that.
Let me
with the talent that's coming, you being a coach being a great recruiter, that's okay. In particular in Louisiana, which is not hard to be. It's not hard to be a good recruiter. You have talent. You bump into people that can play football.
Thank you for the phone call, Jeffrey. Guys, I mean, you hear that from LSU fans all the time, right?
Well, this starts with 3 words: cross-divisional opponent. It's been an issue in the SEC. Not all schedules are created equal. LSU and their permanent opponent is Florida. Unfortunately, with this hurricane thing a couple years ago, they've got to go to the swamp multiple years in a row. Florida's going to be tough with Dan Mullen. Your other East opponent this year happens to be Georgia. Oh, they just played in the national championship, and they're coming to Tiger Stadium this year. So those are your 2 East opponents. So right there, it's a difficult schedule. Oh, by the way, a season opener on a neutral field against Miami, who just finished a fantastic season. They're going to be a preseason top 10 team. So all that creates a tough schedule. And I say this taking a shot at Alabama, because their cross-divisional opponent is Tennessee. Their other East opponent this year happens to be Missouri. Last year it was Vanderbilt. So not all schedules are created equal. This just happens to be one of those years where LSU's got an absolutely brutal schedule. Mississippi State's going to be good. You got to go to A&M. It's just going to be a really, really tough schedule, and that's why expectations are low. We could say LSU's going to go undefeated. We could say LSU's going to win 10 games. It's just not a reality when you look at how the roster looks, all the inexperience on offense, and what your schedule looks like.
I would totally agree, and I think it's going to be a baptism by fire over those first 3 weeks. I think you're really going to know what you're made of after playing Miami and Auburn in week 3. Again, I just go back to the quarterback. If you hit on Joe Burrow, that could completely change the narrative, because if you have a quarterback, if you have someone who can give those receivers confidence and be able to push the ball downfield, then you could be talking about a different season. But if he comes in and he's just what, Danny Etling 2.0, I mean, I just don't think you can expect too much with this schedule.
Andrew, Anthony Davis spoke within the last couple days for the first time since Boogie Cousins moved on to Golden State and Rajon Rondo moved on to the Los Angeles Lakers. A couple things that really stuck out to me in the conversation. First, the fact that the team has kept him in the loop, and he made a point to be able to say that they're keeping him in the loop, but then that he really didn't have a conversation with Boogie Cousins about where he was going to go. And I found that kind of strange, and maybe it was politically correct, because again, he was on the phone with Julius Randle almost immediately trying to recruit him to come to New Orleans. And then the other part of it is, and it's something I think that fans have to be in tune to, Once again, Anthony Davis saying it's all about business, what's best for the family. That's what he was talking about with DeMarcus Cousins. That could be something we could be talking about in a season and a half from now. Your thoughts on what AD had to say about the departure of Boogie Cousins?
When he talked to CBS Sports and he said that he was shocked that he went to the Warriors and how he found out was on television, I believe that part because I think they had pretty much already washed their hands of him. And I think he was surprised that he could even fit in financially on a team like the Warriors. I think, just my personal opinion, I haven't heard this from the team, but based on the New York Times report, for 2 years, $40 million, $20 million a year for DeMarcus Cousins after the injury happened and before free agency started, I think that when he turned that down, I think that Dell Demps, Anthony Davis, and Gentry probably all got together and said, look, we're probably not going to have a chance at this guy unless he's willing to take a market that's really low when we get to free agency, because we're taking that off the table. Why would we overpay for somebody? I think once he knew what had happened as well with Rondo, and they had already gotten Elfrid Payton, I think they knew we've got to go find someone else who's going to be able to take the place of DeMarcus Cousins, because financially we're not even in the same stratosphere. Julius Randle is someone who I think fits in perfectly with this team. And truly, I had tweeted out the information about Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. I talked to a source with the team. There were legitimate concerns that they had with his locker room presence. And that wasn't talked about during the year. It was actually the antithesis of that. Yeah. It was, oh no, he's great in this locker room. You know, he was just bad in Sacramento because, well, it was a bad environment for him. Well, it doesn't really sound like that was the case whenever he was here in New Orleans. And I think you want to be able to be in a work environment, whether you're doing what we are doing or a professional athlete, where you're excited to be able to come to work and you're excited to work with those that you're around. And if you're not bringing a good attitude, then that's somebody where Anthony Davis, as he's gotten older, I think understands the business side more of it and realizes I need to put the best players around me that not only have the best upside, but are going to give me the best potential to be able to win and good teammates to be with.
You got the final word.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Boogie's true colors, right? I mean, I think if he really wanted to be here with Anthony Davis, with Coach Gentry, really thought they were building something, he would have figured out the contract thing. He needs to come back down to earth and realize an Achilles injury is a major concern for a big man like that. So, look, Boogie showed his true colors. He's going to ring chase over at Golden State. We'll see what happens there. But I'll give you a hot take, Eric. I think this team right now is more talented and has way more upside right now than they did at the end of the season.
I agree with you. 100%. I agree
Opening night, they're better.
Yeah, no, they are. Okay, and you got to also preface that by saying Boogie's hurt and Rondo's getting older. Yep. But I think the fit is much better, Chris, with Randle and Payton. Okay,
and the upside of Payton, it goes a long way.
It does. And now you lose that leadership and that mentorship of Rajon Rondo. But, again, you're going to have a guy in Randle that's going to be in the paint instead of at the three-point line. I think they're going to be a better team as well. I really do. Now, it may not show it in the standings because the West got tougher, but I think overall they're going to be a better team. And I think they're going to be a better team to watch. I think the fans are going to enjoy it because it's going to be this up-tempo style.
They'll fit that style they play with.
No doubt about it. Andrew Doak of Channel 4 WLAE-TV, Chris Gordy, my colleague over at Sports 1280. Thanks so much for being on our panel tonight.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. You can catch us statewide every Friday night, 9 o'clock on Pelican Sports Television. Catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, and the iHeartRadio app. That's noon to 2. This guy is on 10 to noon right before me, Chris Gordy. Of course, you can check us out at the Sports 1280 website where you can listen live, download the podcast. You can also listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. All the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports can be seen at ericasher.com as well. Again, special thanks to Andrew Doak and also Chris Gordy for coming down and being on the panel tonight. Also to our WLAE production staff, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Trey Lopez, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. So thank you so much for watching tonight. Next week, we'll have another great panel for you for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Until next week, my name is Eric Asher. Thanks for watching.